Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's panel on negotiation under stress. I've been fortunate to chat with over 150 remarkable people on my Intentional Performers podcast. These people have overcome adversity, thought deeply about leadership, have set up intentional lives for themselves to perform at their best. They're also experts at their craft, and today's guests are certainly experts when it comes to thinking about negotiation and thinking about how we can leverage that in our everyday lives and at our work as well. The coronavirus has created challenges for so many throughout the world, and it is my hope that these panel discussions will help those in need. While everyone on this panel has tremendous expertise, I also want to note that what we are going through is truly unprecedented, and there are many questions that the panelists probably won't have the answer to, and that's simply okay. This isn't designed to give you the answer to every question you have. Instead, it's designed to have you think deeply about how you can handle this challenging time. So with that, I'd like to start with Blake and have him introduce himself, and we'll sort of go from there.
Thanks for having me, Brian, and thank you for everything you're doing. It's incredible. My name is Blake Barretts. I'm president and founder of the Institute for Athletes, which is a traditional sports agency. We represent about 30 NFL players, really in all facets of their life, contractually, marketing endorsements, branding initiatives, philanthropically. I opened it in 2009, and it's grown just really through referrals ever since. And we're trying to take a holistic, comprehensive approach to representing professional athletes. I think traditionally agencies have gotten kind of stagnant, and I don't know if agent's the right word, but I view us more as confidants, life managers, mentors. We treat it, like a family. We're not throwing a fishing pole out to anyone. We're really cognizant of who we bring in. They have to fit a certain niche for us, which is mature guys that want to be better on and off the field, guys that communicate properly, guys that want to be leaders. And it's been great. That's what I do, 365 days a year. And we've added some verticals to our business the last couple of years, but that's where I'm spending probably 75% of my time. And I'm married. Been married 11 years. We have 2 small kids, a 4 and a 2-year-old that I'm sure will barge through that door any moment. And I live in Minneapolis. I know Brian, we went on a trip to Israel together 15 years ago or something like that, and stayed in touch. And now we actually, obviously we're friends, but we have a professional relationship too. Given his background, he works with some of our clients, and we have clients that are in the DC area. And I'm happy to be a part of this and happy to meet you guys. And one of these years, I'm going to get to the shindig out east up at the cabin, and look forward to participating.
Thanks, Blake. Bob, why don't you go next?
Sure. Brian, thanks again for organizing this, and it's such a terrific idea. I'm Bob Bordone. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School now, having just finished 21 years of full-time teaching at Harvard Law School, where I founded the school's negotiation and mediation clinic. I'm now working full-time actually doing the work of negotiation in a number of capacities, sometimes teaching, many times coaching, sometimes facilitating complex negotiations, really across a whole number of industries. A lot of my attention has been, I think by dint of being based in Boston, around healthcare. And the past 2 weeks have seen me doing a lot of coaching of people who are in urgent and challenging negotiations, trying to build a team and coordinate care in a moment of crisis. So it's exciting to be on this panel. I also met Brian not 15 years ago, but I met him on a trip to Israel about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and really excited to be here.
My parents are going to be so proud, and my dead grandparents are going to be even prouder that the first 2 panelists met me in Israel. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Danielle, and she's going to introduce herself.
Thanks, Brian. Also, thanks for having me and for organizing this. It's amazing to, that you're such a servant leader, always trying to provide support guidance, opportunities to as many people as you can, no matter what the circumstances. And I think obviously, as everyone said, we're in a interesting time right now, and you really hit the ground running right away, figuring out how to provide some content and useful tools during this time. So thank you for organizing this and for having us. I did not meet Brian in Israel, but Brian and I also work together. He's worked with a number of my athlete clients over the years. And I am an NBPA certified agent, so I represent NBA players. I'm also the executive vice president and a partner at FAME, which is Falk Associates Management Enterprises, David Falk's sports agency. I have been in the sports industry, specifically in basketball, for 20 years now. Started at SFX Sports in 2000 as part of the talent marketing division, handling athlete endorsements, marketing opportunities for the firm's athlete clients. Did that for many years, and it kind of evolved when SFX sold to Clear Channel, and then flipped it to Live Nation, got out of sports, and that's how I ended up sort of staying with David as he relaunched FAME in 2007. And together we built a ultra boutique agency that we've been running together since then. We have a handful of young current NBA athlete clients and a lot of retired guys that we manage businesses and several different types of activation for. I am also involved with Peace Players International, which Brian also does, on the Leadership Council, and volunteer in a number of other organizations. I'm also a youth soccer coach. I played soccer my whole life, and in college, Division I soccer, and really enjoy giving back now to the next generation of up and coming female soccer players. And I've always been a tomboy, an athlete, love sports. So, kind of always consider myself one of the guys, so to speak. And so I love spending my business life surrounded by professional athletes and trying to help them on and off the court. And I, same thing, character is everything with the athletes we represent, that they can speak well, communicate well, and we're helping them use their platforms to do good and have positive impact in the world around them. And I'm also teaching a class in negotiations in the fall and a class in entrepreneurship in the spring at the GW, the George Washington Law School. Thank you. We use the Harvard Law Book for Negotiations as one of the 5 books we use for our students. So kind of have little connections, I guess, to the other speakers as well. And I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And Matt, why don't you take us home?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm Matt Hartman. I'm a partner at BetaWorks Ventures. We work with a different kind of athlete, which is an entrepreneur, a different kind of high performance individual. And we build and invest in companies at the earliest stages. So we incubated a company called Bitly, a company called Giphy, which is an animated GIF search engine. We've invested in companies like Twitter and Kickstarter and Tumblr, and more recently in companies like Gimlet Media and Anchor. And my personal experience was I was on the entrepreneurial side first. I was at a company that we ended up selling to Facebook. And then I also built a technology platform for a big real estate company called CBRE. And then I built a business at the intersection of real estate and social media. I ended up licensing that to a company called apartments.com before joining BetaWorks. And so my experience is really in negotiations in the context of anything from sales of products to sales of businesses to negotiating with founders when we're making an investment. And so I'm excited to learn from everybody here. And Brian, you're the person who really taught me that high performance individuals are in lots of different places, not just on the court or on the field. And so it's been interesting to learn from you. And my hometown is the same as your hometown in Maryland.
And so what's really cool about this panel that's different than the ones I've done up until now is I know all these people pretty intimately. And Matt's younger brother, Andrew, and I went to high school together. He's a little bit younger than me, and we were in the same fraternity in college as well. So I know of his family, and we won't talk about his brother on air. We'll keep that off air. But where I wanted to start was with Bob. And Bob, can you frame this conversation? Because you said you're in the middle of it right now. And so look, the timing of this, people are in crisis and people are dealing with tough decisions. And so talk about how you're using negotiation, how you think about negotiation, and how it's relevant to what people are going through right now.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. So first of all, as someone who's kind of 100% work is negotiation, I see it everywhere. I see, anytime you're trying to influence anyone's choice, you're negotiating. And, when I thought about the title of this panel, I had kind of two reactions. One was, well, of course, this is a time of huge stress. But then I thought about so many of the people that I work with who would say the act of negotiation is necessarily a time of stress for me, because many people get anxious and they worry about negotiation. And what I would say that in a moment, at least from my experience, and certainly some of kind of the conversations I have over this past week, some of the things that come up more in times of stress that don't set you up as easily for a most optimal or successful negotiation is that you're operating often, with a very severe deadline. Now, deadlines can actually really help negotiations, but deadlines often create a lot of additional stress. You can also see a lot more short, hostile behavior. What's interesting about a moment like this, or any kind of stressful moment, is that there are opportunities for us to, I think, become our very best version of ourselves. But when we're tired, when we're angry, the kinds of little things that bothered you a little bit about your colleagues now are intolerable. And they come out more quickly. And so I think what can also happen is really good negotiators are always thinking about not just their interests in the moment, but what is it going to look like in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years, right? One of the things, even listening to the introductions that I heard the other panelists, talk about is caring about kind of the whole person of their clients and not just what's the best deal I can get for like this season. But I think in a time of crisis, right, our ability and interest to kind of see a longer time frame can also go away, right? Because we're panicked. So I could go on and on, but I would just say these are some of the particular, I think, features that I've seen. I'm happy as we get into this to kind of offer some of what I see as possible pieces of advice that we can bring to a stressful moment. I think these are, at least some of what can make the stressful piece kind of exacerbated in a negotiation.
And Blake, you just went through and are still in the midst of free agency in the sport that you work in. Talk about what it's been like the last couple of weeks, helping to try to get your clients new contracts, and talk about the negotiation and what that process has been like for you under this environment.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bizarre process this year. It's certainly a bizarre process for everyone. In our world, a lot of our free agent conversations, meetings have been going on for months, if not in some cases a year, where our clients are kind of prepared for what we believe the marketplace to be. And then, how they did during the NFL season this year affected ultimately their price. So we were prepared regardless. And then we went to the Senior Bowl and the Combine, and we have a lot of these face-to-face conversations that you start to figure out which teams are real, which interest is real, which dollars are real, and you're constantly in communication with your clients. So from a preparation standpoint, there weren't a lot of concerns. The concerns on our end were more, we were in the middle of a CBA negotiation, so we didn't know if there was going to be a brand new collectively bargained for agreement, which changes the entire set of rules and the landscape. And then simultaneously, I believe deep down that the NFL was probably going to push back free agency, and I know a lot of the teams did. So we were on a Saturday night, the CBA passed. Monday morning, 48 hours later, you had to be in tune with the new rules, which was almost impossible. It's a 575-page document. And then Monday, you could negotiate, and Wednesday free agency was still open on Wednesday. For us, we had 6 or 7 free agents, so we could handle it. I think a lot of the teams were really panicking. And then there were different rules within the teams. Some teams were keeping their facilities open. Some teams were closing them. The NFL finally stepped in and said, hey, we're going to make this even playing field for everybody. And you can't bring college kids in. You can't bring free agents in. You can't give them a physical. So it was challenging in those regards. And we got out in front of it. And when we found deals that we were really comfortable with, we got them done as quickly as possible. Because I didn't think time was necessarily on our side in some of these situations. But it was challenging. I mean, it still is challenging. We still have 3 guys that are free agents. And we can't even confirm when other deals are done because some teams aren't actually signing off on the deals without a physical. And so we see them being reported by Adam Schefter or NFL Network or on social media. So I have to call the GM and say, did this deal get done and what values are there at to input, put it into our database.
Hey,
so
Blake,
it's challenging.
I'm curious, just what's your mindset? Like, how are you navigating these complexities? Talk about how you're focused or where you're paying attention to.
I think a lot of it just comes down to preparation and having consistent communication with your clients and with the team. So, coronavirus was a surprise, but once free agency started, a lot of those things weren't surprises. So for us, it was business as usual. And again, we could handle it for 6 or 7 guys. For an NFL general manager that has to figure out where they're at from a cap perspective, understand the new rules, which guys they want to retain, have simultaneous offers out to different players because you have to fill out a roster is significantly more challenging. And I don't think a lot of them are dealing with it well. The NFL historically is fairly antiquated, not that progressive, technologically challenged. I mean, they're struggling right now. They don't know how to operate. For us, it was, in a weird way, it was kind of business as usual. And in some cases, we kind of had a leg up because the guys that we had that were free agents are, guys that are talented, high character guys, captains of the team, not a lot of concerns, whether character or health related or injury related. So it took a lot of the things that were difficult to navigate off the table for us. That's not because I'm the smartest guy in the world. It was because we got lucky with who our guys that happened to be free this year are.
And Danielle, I saw you go ear to ear with a big smile when Blake said the word preparation. Yeah. Why was that smile so big for you?
So for me and any of my students who ever end up watching this can attest to this. Whenever I teach negotiations, talk about negotiations, live in negotiations, the biggest thing for me is preparation. And I think when you talk about principles of negotiation, different styles, the stages, preparation plays into all of it. And how you approach the entire preparation process, in my opinion, impacts everything in terms of the outcome of a negotiation, no matter what kind of negotiation it is. And so if you can master the preparation stage, I believe that's what makes for a successful negotiator. And with that means anticipating the other side's potential arguments, their potential interpretation of relevant comps in the marketplace, which may not be the comps you would have identified, but in the preparation stage, really trying to cover all bases, trying to really think outside the box, put yourself in the other side's shoes, really take on their perspective. Everything Blake said really resonated with me and is much of what I live and breathe in terms of approach to free agency and also to the recruiting process. But what's interesting now, as we talk about what we're going through now, is as much as I love to preach the importance of preparation, here we are in a time where no one was prepared for the world we're living in. And what does that mean for someone who relies, myself relies so heavily on my work ethic and my attention to detail in the preparation mindset, as Brian likes to call it, and we can get into that a whole other time. But initially that was difficult, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't prepared for this situation, but no one else was. Not even our government or our country. That's a separate issue too. We'll keep politics aside for now. And
The Art of the Deal. I mean, that's a negotiation book, right, Bob Bordone?
It is a negotiation.
It is. And so when, at the end of the day, though people aren't prepared for what we're dealing with in terms of the technology we have to rely so heavily upon right now, or, the lack of human interaction, various things we're all going through, health scares, anxiety, pressures. At the end of the day, you're still consistent in your value system and committed to those values and to how you carry yourself and what you do. And I think mental toughness really comes into play here. People who are mentally strong, mentally tough can really, thrive in tough times. And so this is no different. I love the challenge. I love the new challenge of trying to figure out how to navigate these times. And although I wasn't technically prepared, like I said, for what we're doing, what Blake mentioned is so true. You're still prepared for the task at hand. You're still prepared for free agency or for recruiting. And though some of the dynamics have changed and certain elements are out of your control, it's so important to just remain focused and really tuned in to the principles and the values. And at that point, nothing else should matter. I like to say, I over prepare, and I think of every possible detail, every possible challenge, hiccup in the deal, whatever it is, so that the reason I say that in the preparation, so that when I get into the room, when I'm at the negotiating table or recruiting table, or I guess now on the web conference, whatever platform we should use technology wise, once I'm in that room, it's game time and it's go time. And if you're fully prepared, then you have the confidence, in my opinion, to really lock in and be fully present for the process of the negotiation. And when you're present, you can be more flexible. You can adapt if something that you maybe didn't fully anticipate comes up. You're not thinking, what am I going to say next? Or how am I going to respond to this question? Because you're so fully prepared that you're present and you're able to be more adaptable in the moment. And I think that can be applied to what we're all going through now.
And Matt, this is going to show how ill prepared I am for this. What were you doing in 2008, 2009?
I started business school in 2009. I was at CBRE in the real estate industry in 2008.
Beautiful.
So that was sort of an interesting time to see that world. And I wasn't in tech, which is sort of one of the things I've been doing is talking to a lot of venture capital investors who did live through the 2008 crisis and understanding what their perspective is on today versus then. I'm kind of curious for Danielle or Bob or Blake's point of view. When you talk about being prepared, how much are you talking about the information versus cultivating potential alternatives versus kind of other pieces of preparation? Because I can imagine there's a knowing everything there is to know and kind of having a point to versus sort of almost like knowing what you want. Or is it all of those elements?
So for me, it's all of those elements. When I talk about preparation, that's why I really overemphasize it, because it's the information, it's doing your due diligence, it's seeing, like I said, seeing the argument, the potential points, point, counterpoint from all perspectives. It's thinking outside the box during the information gathering stages, talking to other people close to the people you're dealing with, and then people close to them, really, using your network and beyond, people you rely on to, get the most accurate information you can, but then also the people, understanding the people you're dealing with. There's a human aspect to this that's so important, is the psychology of the people with whom you're negotiating. And, although once you're in the negotiating room and that process starts, it's oftentimes important to try to separate the problems or the issues from the people. It's the human aspect of it is so important in the preparation process. And it's also things as simple as which we can't really use in the current environment, but things as simple as where you're going to meet, what you're going to wear, who's going to make the first offer. All of these things are part of the preparation process for me. And for me, in a free agent negotiation, in a recruiting meeting, whatever it is, the preparation stage for me lasts so much longer than just, okay, I got to sit down for the next few hours and prepare for this negotiation. For me, it's cultivating relationships and maintaining relationships over a long period of time leading up to a negotiation that it may not even be for a specific negotiation. But in my world, in Blake's world, we're dealing with the same GMs and owners time and time again, right? It's a long horse race. You're going to have to deal with these people for multiple negotiations over long periods of time. So it's really, for me, when you're not in free agency or you're not in a particular negotiation period, you're always in the preparation stage because you're always maintaining the relationship. So you really have a good rapport with the people you're going to end up dealing with when it does come time for negotiation. And so now in these, in the current, in our current situation, you're preparing for, so I'm not in free agency like Blake, but this is recruiting time, and we don't even know what's going to happen with the NBA draft yet. But you lose the NCAA tournament, which is huge for basketball. And for me in recruiting, being able to connect with the individual, with his family, with his advisors, with people around him, that's where I excel. I can get in a room, and part of the preparation is over a long period of time, getting as much information as I can about this prospect, his family, etc., so that by the time I ever meet him, I know as much as I possibly can, and hopefully more than any of the competition, about this individual and why he might be a good fit for our agency, and how I can, what the value add is on my end to differentiate myself from the competition. And so much of that for me really relies heavily upon that human interaction and being able to have a genuine connection with the individual, his mom, whomever in the room. And so now when you take that away, and for the first time ever, we're having these, Zoom, Google, whatever platform, online recruiting pitches. It really changes that aspect of the preparation stage, because you're removing all of the opportunity to have a human interaction. And how do you do that? And how does that look different? And you, at the end of the day, you're on a screen, but you still have to try to find that same way to connect without being physically present in the same room.
And Bob and Blake, I'm going to just pause you for a second because I don't want Matt to get off the hook. I appreciate your curiosity, Matt, but I want to get your perspective because it's different from the other panelists. So you're at CBRE during this time of crisis in the real estate industry. So you have that experience. You also have the experience of negotiating and trying to get terms for your business and for something that you create and selling it. And now you're on the other side of it. And by the way, shout out to Bitly, which is one of the companies that you talked about. I use Bitly to put the links out for these conversations. It's an amazing, amazing tool for those that don't know. But
yeah, I use it all the time.
Yeah, it's awesome. So when those three areas, I'm just curious to get your perspective on the negotiations that take place when you're wearing those different hats, and if they're similar or if they're different, and what that experience is like.
Yeah, I mean, I view those negotiations as being actually pretty similar in terms of kind of the preparation, in terms of, I mean, what Danielle was talking about was almost what I would think of as like sales, but it's also to Bob's point, these are everything's a negotiation in some way, right? To me, when I look at the difference between some of these things, it's actually, maybe this is uh, a more introspective way to look at it, but the things that have changed in those are really my approach to negotiating versus, and I wish I had taken the same approach when I was looking at helping a company sell uh, or making an investment in a company that I took when I was negotiating an agreement to potentially sell my company. And I think that when I look at the thing that resonated with me was thinking about, even small things like making the first offer there aren't hard and fast rules, right? It's sometimes you have enough information that it makes sense to make an offer, and sometimes you don't have enough information, in which case listening is almost always listening is the most important thing. But to me, the thing that changed through all those different types of negotiation was actually just my approach. I think to what I learned, I think the other thing that Danielle said that resonated with me was just having the repeatability of having multiple sort of multi-turn negotiations is really different than doing a one-off negotiation. And if you're in an industry where you're, as an investor, we do like, I don't know, 20 deals a year. And so it's a lot of investments we're making. And if we have a reputation it's a negative reputation, we're trying to kind of eke out that last thing. I'm sure we can get it, right? But then our reputation is going to suffer, and people are going to approach us that way. And I think a lot of these reputations are individual as much as they are as firm related. So I think one thing I've learned is trying to be a good communicator while negotiating, which means talking but also listening a ton and really understanding what people want. Two is, to the extent that I can, I really try to, and this changed a lot for me. I approached early negotiations in my career withholding information, right? Really being scared about getting taken advantage of. And what I learned was there are some times where it makes sense to obfuscate some information. For example, saying, here are my order of my priorities, but not necessarily here's the most important thing to me, or here's not how that is. Here's a way that that I'm thinking about doing the deal. I mean, I'll give you a quick example, which is we made an investment in a company, and often when you have follow-on investments, there's sharp elbows to the table. The lead investor coming in at the next round wants to make sure they can get all of the investment they can get. Other people, once a deal is happening, now want to invest where they were sitting on the sidelines before. And my approach now is to really share my intention with the founder. Here's what we're trying to do. I want to make sure we have X% ownership in the company, and my back of the envelope calculation is that this is the dollar amount that's needs to get me there. But I'm really flexible in the dollar amount as long as we can get the percentage. A lot of other investors feel the opposite way, and their approach is they really need to make sure they put this much money to work. And we're in that particular case, you might be able to expand the pie, where if you don't give the person the information that of your actual interest, they may try to solve for your sort of the interest that you're feigning versus just sort of sharing your goals. And so all things being equal, I try to optimize for just sharing as much information as I can, because I think that will help the other person take my actual interest into account.
And Bob, I see you nodding your head over there. What's your perspective on what Matt, and you were going to also comment when Danielle was chatting, so I cut you off, but give us your perspective.
Yeah. So, I mean, everything both of them say resonates, very much with me, very much with really the research. I mean, I was, nodding, Matt, when you were talking about sharing information, right? I mean, we know from research that the way you find the biggest possible deal is under conditions of what is called FOTE, full, open, truthful exchange. Now, the reality is in any negotiation, the more information you share, the more open you are to getting exploited, because as you were indicating, right, if someone knows the most important thing is X, well, then they could hold out and get everything they want and then give you X. And so I think the tension is always, how do we find ways, set up a process where each of us can actually share information about our true preferences with some sense that the risk that the other side is going to take advantage of us is going to be minimized, because the more we get those true preferences out there, the better we're going to be at finding creative outcomes to make them happen. And I think that then really, really connects to what Danielle is saying around the importance of building relationships, understanding what's really important to people over a longer period of time, right? Where you develop, especially in an industry where there's, repeat play, a sense that you're trustworthy, which means that you're obviously going to be working really hard on behalf of yourself or your client, but you care about outcomes that are kind of grounded in information. And so, the question you had asked earlier, Matt, about what do you mean by preparation? To me, I think about it in a number of domains, right? One domain is absolutely facts and figures. If you're in the world of facts and figures and statistics, right? If you're in the world of, science and medicine, right? It's really knowing, what are the epidemiological studies telling you? Like, how many ventilators do we need? Why do we need those ventilators now? And why should our hospital get them and not this other hospital? But it's also understanding who the players are, and what their internal incentive systems are within their organization. So understanding what are the patterns of deference within an organization, right? And sometimes they're formal, like Jill is Joe's boss, but often they're informal. People defer to other people because of relationships, because of past history. And so that's another really important domain. And then I think the third, right, is really that individual relationship building that's important. And the other overlay I'll put on this, and this is something that Danielle, you were really mentioning, is the role that process plays in all negotiations. And so one of the things we're seeing right now is a disruption of process. The process that you would use, which I have only the vaguest idea of, right, around the NBA draft, right, is gone. And so I think it's really important to think about, given the modes that we have available to us, how do we design a process that enables information exchange, that draws upon actual facts, information, and data, that enables people to kind of build the relationships that they need, limited means that we have, right? So that we can get optimal outcomes.
And Bob, it was a perfect segue of what I'm thinking about, which is right now we're sitting here. It's Friday, 1:45. We're in the thick of this thing, and Matt, you're in the tech world. There are probably startups right now that are making hard decisions on whether they need to lay off a certain percentage of their people. Blake, you run a business and are always, managing people. I think you're also involved with a restaurant. Like there's complicated decisions that need to get made. Danielle, when do you reach out to the family, and what if they're struggling with somebody physically right now? I mean, people are in the hospital, people are dying. This isn't like some made up crisis. This thing's real. When do I send an invoice for the work that I do? When, like, Bob, you started by saying negotiation is everywhere in your opinion.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way. Like, I was supposed to have lunch and coffee with 15 other people over the next 3 weeks. And what's appropriate, the timing, the when. Blake, you said earlier, maybe I want to get things done a little quicker because of the chaotic or unknown situation. So I'd love to hear in real time if you have any thoughts or advice for people that are wrestling with those things, because I know I am in my business. And I think most people that are watching this are either concerned that they might be the one laid off, making tough decisions on laying people off. I talked to someone this morning who's in retail and is trying to figure out, what do I do with my retail stores? I mean, these are like real issues. Do I negotiate with my landlord and say, hey, I can't pay you my rent right now. So here we are, like right now. So if one of you wants to raise your hand and try to shed some light, I'm happy to sort of pass it because I think all of you could give insight if one of you wants to take it. Danielle, why don't you go and then I'll kick it over to
So
Bob.
I just want to say one thing. I'm sure everyone will have a lot more to say. Mine's not, mine's more generally addressing your question, but I think probably the most important thing in everything you just asked is it's okay to not have all the answers right now and in any situation. For me personally, I think it's, and a lot of this really, as Matt sort of mentioned earlier, in terms of how his style changed over time, is with more experience comes more confidence. And when you have more confidence in what you're doing, in your own ability, I think it makes it easier to know what you don't know and to admit that and to be able to articulate that. And so everything you just asked, Brian, the most important thing in my opinion is communication and honesty and transparency. And I think no one has to have all the answers right now in terms of when the right time is to lay someone off or not, when the right time is to reach back out to a recruit that I'm recruiting, when the right time is for Blake to try to push a deal to get done faster than usual. But if you're communicating that to the people and making them feel that they're part of the process and humanizing it with them every step of the way, then I think you have a better outcome in the end, either way. And I think that's the most important thing right now is so many people don't know what to do, but they're not communicating as regularly as they could be about that. And so then people on the other end are kind of just waiting, and who knows what's happening during that waiting period. So as long as you're really working hard to keep open those lines of communication and provide as much transparency as you can, I think you have a better result in the end, no matter what it is.
Bob, what's your perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had 2 points and now I have one. Because because the transparency piece I think is so important. Just being direct about what you know and what you don't know actually has a calming effect. And so the second thing I wanted to say though, which I think is actually related, but I think there's a way in which, particularly under times of crisis, we can see decisions as binary. I either lay them off or I don't. I either do this or I don't. And I think a really important lesson that I've learned from really great negotiators, not myself, is that if we take a step back and can just look at what are the kind of underlying interests of people on both sides of an employment situation. Some of them are shared and some of them are definitely different, but there's usually some more creative ways of talking about it that have contingencies that allow us to be a little bit more flexible and nimble and creative. Of course, that requires some transparency. But I think if we feel that we're stuck with an either yes or no, on or off, we lose a lot of possibility that negotiation can really bring to the table in a moment like this.
And Blake, you live in a world where it's very transactional in nature. Even though, yes, you want to build the relationships over the long term, you're signing a 3-year deal, and that's the terms. What have you learned over the years? What's changed in your style or your approach in how you handle negotiations now, and maybe how you used to handle it 10 years ago?
Honestly, I don't know if my philosophy has changed much. My philosophy has always been be as transparent as you can, be honest as you can, understand your client, and I try to treat everybody the same. I try to treat everyone equally. I talk to the owner of the Redskins the same way that I talk to my wife, or the same way I talk to my clients. So I think over time you build credibility. You build credibility as being an honest, transparent individual. That doesn't mean I'm trying to divulge information that would hurt me or hurt my client, but I'm also just not an agent that's out there saying, let's go get the most amount of money. Getting the most amount of money may not be what's in the best interest of your client. I think that's a a huge misnomer in our field, Danielle, is I think
Absolutely.
there are some clients that say, I don't care. This is my one chance. I want to make as much money as humanly possible. But I try to convey to players that, let's figure out what's important to you, because especially in the NFL where the contracts are not fully guaranteed, you have a short shelf life. Um, it's understanding what they want. And that's always been my approach. And I've seen in my business specifically, even literally up until yesterday, there's a lot of agents out there that are making empty promises to their clients. I talked to a GM yesterday that told me he'll never deal with an agent again because they're going to the market unprepared. To Danielle's point, why preparation is so important. They're promising the world based on some numbers or stats, but that offer may not be there. The landscape consistently changes, and you're playing Russian roulette with a guy's career and livelihood, and I don't take that lightly. So I will never do that. Some guys want to hear how great they are and how much money they're going to make, and if I don't believe it to be true, I'm not going to tell my client that, which I'm not the best fit for everyone. Like Antonio Brown and I, is not going to be a good relationship. I need guys that get it. I need guys that will listen. I need guys that I can tell difficult information to, that I'm going to tell you the good news, the bad news, the indifferent news. And again, to Daniel's point, preparation, I think, is in all facets. It's the relationships, it's socially, it's statistically, all of those things end up, building up your credibility. At the end of the day, you either have leverage or you don't. So it doesn't really matter. In the NFL especially, it's really difficult to get leverage. The NFL shield is always going to be more powerful than any one player. I mean, Tom Brady just left the Patriots. The NBA is a little different. They're a little more progressive. They make it a little more about the players. LeBron James and Steph Curry and whoever the 12 superstars could probably get together and get a lot of things changed if they wanted to. It's a superstar-driven league, and they can play for 18 years. The NFL is very, very, very different in that capacity. The top players in the league rarely get leverage. And you're seeing it with Dak Prescott right now. The owners have done a very good job of minimizing what the players can do from a contractual standpoint, a free agency standpoint. That all affects how we have to approach the negotiation, because this is their one chance to create generational wealth for themselves or their family. And I don't take that lightly, but that's not what every guy wants to hear.
And there's a common thread that you all have hit on, which is empathy. Blake, you're saying, hey, what's best for my clients? And then it's my job to help them get what they want. Danielle, you talked about working with, people over a long period of time and trying to figure out how it can be a win-win, basically. And Bob, I know this is something I've seen you in action doing workshops on negotiation, is really understanding what does the other person want. Matt, you talked about listening. That's the only way you can really find out, to know what somebody else wants. But Matt, Blake brings up a really interesting point around leverage. And in your world, there's going to be some opportunities that come up in the next week, 2 weeks, where companies are in need of money and might be in a tight spot. And how different investors are leveraged might create some opportunities without being cold and callous to the health of and well-being of people. There are going to be opportunities and situations. I'm just curious how you think about that when you're in a negotiation, the leverage piece. And if you're more owner than you are player, as Blake was saying, and in a position where you can maybe get a greater return on your investment.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a couple ways. One is there's leverage in and there's sort of inequality in some negotiations, some deals, and some deals that aren't. To me, the strongest leverage point is just the willingness to walk away. And if you know what you want, or what the person you represent wants, then it's actually sometimes becomes very easy to say, be direct and say, here's our model. For us, here's our business model, and here's how much we have to own of a company, and here's the way we're thinking about price. And because a lot of the times the conversations are about price or about deal terms, and being comfortable saying, look, this is our model, and I've had founders come back to me and say, I say sort of, here's option A and option B, and we're indifferent between these two. We think this one makes sense for you, but up to you. And that's often a way to kind of communicate both indifference and willingness to walk away if it's not one of those two options. And I've had founders come back to me and say, even when they didn't like the option, say, you're very clear with how with how you were thinking about it, and gave me the choice to be able to kind of look at what would let me kind of, if I wasn't necessarily showing you all of my cards, let me kind of privately look at my cards and say, okay, based on this, you're indifferent between these two things. Here's this one makes more sense than this one. But I do think that there's companies we're looking at now that are in very strong positions with people being quarantined, and their user numbers are going up, and they're saying, look, our deal's closing this week, and so we can say, this is and it's at this price, and we said at that price it doesn't make sense for us. I understand why it makes sense for you, and if you're gonna, in our world, it's like we're gonna raise a small amount at a very high valuation. I think that there are pros to that, but there are also cons to that as we come out of this. And will you be able to raise the next round and grow into that valuation with such a small amount of capital? I'm sure there's similar things in sports negotiation, where you're sort of saying, okay, well, do you really want to optimize for that? The example of, is your goal actually to make all the money? Is your goal actually to limit your dilution in the startup world? Or is your goal to put yourself in a really strong position going forward to have the options that you actually value? One other comment I wanted to make was that I thought that I think right now in sort of coronavirus quarantine world is in many ways a great equalizer. So if you don't have the NCAA tournament right now, you're missing a whole bunch of data. If you don't have a draft, then you're missing a whole bunch of process. Similarly, in startups, normally we expect to meet with somebody in person, and so that gives a tremendous advantage to people who live in Silicon Valley. All of a sudden, a VC doesn't actually know whether they're talking to somebody in Paris or in California or New York. So in many ways, it's an equalizer. So there's pros and cons, I think, to it. And then the other thing that you guys, I think was a common thread everybody mentioned was the value of integrity. And people think about integrity. When I used to growing up, I think, so this is a good thing. Inherently, it's good, but it's also actually a competitive advantage. It's mathematically makes sense to be more honest and to share more information and to listen to people, because you'll get that reputation, and then people will trust you. And trust is a currency in negotiation over long term.
So in an effort to act with integrity and respect all of your times, I'm going to just close by asking each of you to share any advice quickly, and also where people can learn more about what you're up to. I know all four of you are tweeters. All of you are on in the Twitter sphere, whatever it's called. Some of you more than others, but I know all of you live there. And so let people know where they can follow you on social. And if you have any insight or advice, that a nugget that you want to leave people with. And I could do this for another 2 hours, but that's me. So I just want to thank you all for your time. I know you're all very busy and have a lot going on. Some of you are in the middle of free agency right now. Others of you are in the middle of deals and, creating coursework or working on a bunch of other stuff. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your friendship. And Bob, why don't you just let people know where they can find you and any last second insight that you think people would enjoy learning?
Sure. And thanks again, Brian, and everyone for doing this. I've learned a lot about negotiation today, which is great. So yeah, you can find me I do tweet. For a while, I was tweeting a lot of politics, but that kind of ended. So you can find me at Bob Bordone on Twitter, or my website, which is really easy, bobbordone.com. And the thing I wanted to just share, a lot of this conversation has been about deal making for obvious reasons. A big part of negotiation, though, is also resolving and managing disputes and conflicts. And I think this is a moment where we see a lot of wonderful human action happening around people coming together and helping each other. I think, unfortunately, there's going to be, in fact, inevitably, a stream of conflicts that are coming now and that will flow from this. And a lot of the tools and skills we're talking about around deal making actually apply in conflict management. And I think my hope is that I will be able to, as this moves forward, to help parties who find themselves in conflict situations, needing some help either strategically thinking about it or maybe working with people on other sides of the conflict, to really see this as an opportunity to actually build the bridge and be creative, and not just kind of hunker down and defend. And so if people are interested in that, it's a topic that's quite close to my heart. And I'm trying to see this moment as an opportunity that might be really for us to remember what's most important. And as this ends, use our considerable skills and talents to resolve these differences that will necessarily arise from contracts broken and bad things happening, to use them as a way to actually build something more generative.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Blake, why don't you go next?
Yeah, thanks again, Brian, for putting this together. I learned a lot, and to each of you individually, congratulations on what you guys have built. It's impressive, and hopefully get an opportunity to stay in touch. So I appreciate all you guys and Brian for putting it together. I don't even know if I know my handles. My Twitter
at Blake Barrett's. That's his last name. And then their website. I never know if your website is up and running or not. But your Team IFA. But is your website even up? He loves Twitter.
Blake must have been on it more recently than I am. I have no idea.
Yeah. Blake and Bob both like tweeting, and well, Bob mentioned politics. Blake doesn't hold back on his tweets either. There's not a big filter in Blake. Sometimes I read Blake's tweets, and I'm like, dude, are you sure that's what you want to put out there? But Blake doesn't sugarcoat and doesn't hold back on some of his thoughts and opinions.
I get like interventions from my office being like, can you tone it down a little bit on Twitter? I'm like, I try, and then like after 3 months, I have a relapse, and I put something out there again.
Danielle, go ahead, Blake. Any other thoughts?
No, I guess overall thoughts. I think just during this crazy time, I think it's important just to help small businesses, local businesses, just in general. I think that's a key driver to our economy and people keeping their jobs and whatnot. So I think that's really important as much as humanly possible. I've certainly helped Amazon plenty, but I'm going to try to help as many local businesses as I can. And from a negotiation standpoint, I just think it's important to be tough but fair and be transparent and be honest. And I can't remember if it was you, Brian, or Bob, but someone spoke a lot about communication. Danielle, it might have been you. Communication is key, and whenever I see issues, 90% of the time it comes from a failure or lack of communication. Communication can solve a lot of things, and you can be a great football coach, but you could be a terrible communicator. You could be a great GM, but be a terrible communicator. You can be a great wide receiver, but be a terrible communicator. So all of these things, in my opinion, come down to how you communicate, and to communicate with a wide array of people, you have to be able to adapt to different personalities, and that's going to ultimately lead to better results. In my opinion, I'm not the expert. I wasn't fortunate enough to go to Harvard, so I'm not the expert.
Well, Blake, you're not just surrounded by Harvard. I didn't mention Danielle went to Penn. Matt went to Penn too, right, Matt? Yeah, so we got Ivy Leagues around us. And Bob went to Dartmouth before.
My real love is
before
Dartmouth,
Harvard.
actually.
Yeah, he got too many Ivy Leagues.
I'm going to be tweeting something to the incoming Dartmouth class of 2024 shortly. So
awesome.
And
Blake's a dummy. He went to Tulane and then went to Wisconsin, right?
Correct.
So he's just really dumb. Yeah, just so we're clear. Danielle, why don't you go next?
Yeah, thanks again for doing this. I really enjoyed the conversation. Love what each of you are doing, and actually hope we can keep in touch after this, because I have some follow-up questions for each of you, actually. But I'm on Twitter, dcantor22. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm definitely reachable. I try to respond very quickly to as many people as I can. I think during this time, as I mentioned before, and Blake just touched on again, the importance of communication and the importance of staying connected with people. And it's so interesting because I always like to talk about the need to disconnect in order to connect, to disconnect from technology and from distraction in order to be fully present and connect in person with people. I didn't mention earlier that I'm also a wife and a mother. In my introduction, I kind of forgot the most important aspects of my life. I have 2 daughters and a wonderful husband, and obviously I have a lot of travel, a lot of demands in my career. And when I first had kids, my daughters are now 9 and 7. It was quite an adjustment, because I am an A++ individual, driven, motivated. hold myself to very high standard. And it was hard because I wanted to be the absolute best, both as a mother and in my career. And what I learned, what I was able to do, I think, to get to a better place to have that balance is when I am with my family, I am fully present and with my family. And so it's quality over quantity. I may not be there all the time, but when I'm there, my clients know that they may have to wait for a minute unless it's an emergency, and vice versa. Once I go and I'm on a business trip or I'm with my clients, then I'm fully present and fully there for them, and my family understands that. So I think it's so important typically to put your phone down when it's family time. Put the phone down when you're having an important conversation with a client or with a colleague. Here now, what we're going through, ironically, we are relying so heavily on technology in order to stay connected. So I think the challenge is how we do that in a meaningful way, and maintain that genuine interaction with people when technology is involved. And I think it's really important to stay disciplined and to stay connected with people during this time, because when you're home in quarantine and just adjusting to this new normal, not leaving the house, not going into an office, it may become more and more difficult to stay connected and to maintain those lines of communication. And so I think we have to try even harder just to check in with people, to empathize with people, and most importantly, to find a way to add value, whether it's identifying one person and finding a way to add value to that individual's life and what he or she is going through right now, or to find a way based on your skill set or on your position, whatever it is in life, find a way to add value based on the current situation. And when you can do that, I think there will be long-term dividends once we all come out of this. And I think that can be applied to any aspect of life anyway, in terms of differentiating yourself by adding value. And adding value doesn't always mean being the first to speak up or the loudest. Oftentimes that means listening. Like Matt said earlier, it means being the best listener, because that's the way you can add value at that particular time. So I think stay disciplined, stay connected, and over communicate during this period of time, as we're all navigating these sort of uncharted territories.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Matt, take us home.
So I'm Matt Hartman on Twitter. So we're sharing our Twitters. I'll give you I'll stick to negotiations specifically. I think that negotiations is one of the few things where academia and practical life have very quick feedback loops. So you can watch an article, you can read an article about it, you could read a book about it, you can watch a quick YouTube video, and you will see opportunities to apply that immediately and practice it. And practicing actually helps. I think that's such a fun, exciting part of specifically about negotiations, is that it's just present everywhere. So thank you, Brian, for having me on, and thank you to everybody for educating me on how this is applicable elsewhere. And I hope everybody stays healthy and safe and washes their hands.
I love that. I love that Matt brought up practice, because a lot of people talk about preparation, and I actually make a distinction between practice and preparation. I think practice is the act of actually practicing what it's like to perform. So with that in mind, when I see my 3-year-old daughter tonight, I'm going to be practicing negotiation to try to get her to go to bed and stay in her bed, which I will be using everything that I've learned during this conversation today. You all didn't caveat it to say if it's applicable to 3-year-olds, but we'll try, and I'll report back to each of you. And a check is in the mail if it works for each of you. I'm on Twitter at Brian Levinson, Instagram intentional_performers. You can listen to all these conversations on intentionalperformers.com. Thank you all for your time. I know you're busy. I know you got to run. Appreciate it. I love you all very much. Stay safe. I'll wash my hands. You too. See ya. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Brian.